How dare you close this road? We have a right to be here. Not anymore, you don't. I hold the deed and the keys. Now get out. That line still plays in my head like a movie I didn't audition for. Except it wasn't Hollywood, it was a one-lane gravel road in the North Carolina mountains, and the leading lady was my neighbor and HOA president standing in my entry hall like she paid the mortgage. I've made that same drive since 2018. I-40 west out of Charlotte, 321 north up into Watauga County. Then the county roads start climbing into the high country, and the air changes, the light changes, even your engine sounds different, like it's breathing thinner air. I don't follow the route by mile markers, I follow it by landmarks. Linear exit, Caldwell County line, that one bend where 321 starts to climb and you can hear the tires hush on the pavement. And then you hit Ridge Run Lane, my lane, 1.7 miles of private gravel road that sits entirely on my deed, no easements, no shared access, no, technically it's yours, but nonsense. Just mine. Private road, private land, private house. That's why I bought the place. 25 years as a federal prosecutor in Charlotte does something to a man's appetite for noise. Not because you hate people, but because you learn the difference between quiet, you choose, and chaos that chooses you. This mountain house was chosen quiet, 18 acres on a ridge timber frame construction wraparound porch that faces west toward the Blue Ridge like the world's slowest screensaver. No neighbors in the view, no buildings, just ridge lines layered like smoke. It was the kind of property you understand in legal terms as clearly as you understand it in practical ones. What's mine is documented, recorded, and unambiguous. Or at least I thought it was. I hadn't been up there since September of 2024. I usually come in spring and fall, sometimes winter, if I want that specific kind of silence you only get when snow smothers the trees and the creek turns into background music. I'd told my property manager, Dale Hutchkins, I'd be coming up the second Friday of January week, maybe 10 days. He confirmed the heat was running, driveway had been cleared after a December snowfall. What he didn't confirm because he didn't know was what happened in the 11 weeks between his last check in early October and my January arrival. I turned onto the county road that feeds Ridge Run at around 3:15 p.m. January light in Watauga County is flat and pale, like the sky forgot to load the blue texture. Bare hardwood ridge lines. Cold that sneaks through your coat even when you're not standing still. I cracked my window on the approach because I've been listening to that creek since 2018, same creek that runs alongside Ridge Run for the first half mile. It's part of the arrival like a welcome mat made of sound. I rolled onto Ridge Run at 3:20, gravel crunching, one lane wide with a few pull-offs. It runs north through mixed hardwood and hemlock, crosses the creek on a timber bridge around the 0.66 mile mark, then climbs the ridge in switchbacks and finally dumps you out at my driveway at 1.7 miles. I know every curve, every dip, every place the shadows pool. Which is why at 3:28 p.m. when I came around the final left curve and saw the motion sensor light glowing at the driveway entrance, my stomach tightened before my brain finished the sentence. That light is programmed for dusk around 5:15 in January. It was on because something had triggered it in the last 15 to 20 minutes. Something moving. I eased into the driveway and immediately saw a car I'd never seen before parked in my second bay, a silver Subaru Outback with Watauga County plates. Not a contractor truck, not a delivery van, not anything that made sense. And then I saw the front porch light was on. I never leave the porch light on. I sat there with my hands on the wheel for one long beat, listening to my own engine tick as it cooled, and I felt that old courtroom instinct kick in, the one that says, don't assume you're safe just because you're home. I walked up to the front door and slid my key in. It didn't turn. I tried again, just enough pressure to confirm it wasn't stiff from winter. The key fit the keyway, but the cylinder wasn't mine. It was like shaking hands with someone wearing your friend's face. Someone had changed my lock. I looked through the side lights, two narrow windows flanking the door, and I saw the entry hall. A coat rack that wasn't mine, holding 4 or 5 everyday coats like the people wearing them, had been coming and going for weeks. A lamp on the entry table that wasn't mine. Furniture in the living room that wasn't arranged the way I left it. Not tossed, not vandalized, lived in. Someone was living in my house. Now, I'm not a man who shows emotion on demand. 25 years prosecuting federal cases teaches you to separate the fact of a situation from your reaction to it. You assess, you act, you save the panic for later, maybe never. I walked back to my truck, shut the door, and made 3 calls. First call, James Whitfield, my attorney in Charlotte. He's handled my property matters for years, and before he went into real estate law, he was criminal defense. The man lives at the intersection of who owns what and who's about to be arrested. He answered on the second ring. James, I'm at the Watauga County place. Someone changed my locks. Someone's living in my house. A pause. Not a dramatic pause, more like the mental shift of a man pulling a file out of a drawer. Are you inside? No. I'm in my truck. Key doesn't work. I can see through the side lights, different furniture, personal belongings. Do not attempt entry. Call the sheriff now. Call me back after. Don't talk to whoever's inside before the deputy arrives. James I said, I know how to wait for law enforcement. And there was just the faintest warmth in his voice when he replied, right. Sorry. Call the sheriff. Second call, Watauga County Sheriff's Department non-emergency line. I explained it cleanly. I'm the owner of record. I arrived today. Locks changed. Unauthorized occupant. I need a deputy. Response time about 35 minutes. Third call, Dale. He picked up on the fourth ring and he sounded tired. The kind of tired that isn't sleep. It's life. Dale, when did you last check the property? Silence. The kind that tells you the answer is going to ruin your day. Victor, early October. My dad's been in the hospital since October 12th. I should have arranged coverage. I didn't. I kept thinking it'd be a week or two. I'm sorry. 3 months. Then I asked him something that felt like a needle sliding under a fingernail. Did anyone call you in late October or early November asking if the property would be occupied? Another silence longer. There was a call, end of October, maybe first week of November. Someone said they were from a maintenance company. Asked if it'd be occupied through winter. I said you usually don't come up until January. My hands tightened around the phone. Dale, I said slow, who's in my house? I don't know, he said, voice cracking just slightly. Victor, who's in your house? I'm about to find out. I hung up and sat there in the driveway staring at that Subaru like it had just insulted my mother. I didn't go back to the door. I didn't knock. I didn't do anything that would escalate it before law enforcement got there. Instead, I did something that makes sense only if you've spent your life around people who bolt when consequences arrive. I drove down to the bottom of Ridge Run Lane and parked my truck across the only road out, nose on one shoulder, tail on the other, blocking the full width. Emergency brake, engine off. And I waited. One road in, one road out. I spent 25 years as a federal prosecutor. You learn when someone's about to run. While I waited, I stared up the lane as it curved into the winter trees, and I thought about the adjacent property, the Blue Ridge Summit Community Association, an HOA on the other side of my western boundary fence. I'd seen their fence line from my porch for years. I'd heard one name twice from Dale over the past couple of years. Connie Marsh, HOA president. Once she'd asked Dale if I'd be interested in selling. Another time, Dale told me she'd been telling neighbors the property was wasted on someone who's never there. At the time, I laughed. People say things. People get bored in the mountains and start thinking they're the mayor of other people's lives. But sitting there with my road blocked and my house occupied, I didn't feel like laughing. At 4:11 p.m., a cruiser pulled up Deputy Garrett Souls, 2 minutes ahead of estimate. I moved my truck just enough to let him in, then walked to his window and gave him everything in order. Name, address, ownership arrived today, locks changed, unknown vehicle, visible signs of occupancy. I handed him a printed copy of the deed James had emailed, and I'd printed on the way up, old habit. In my line of work, paperwork is the difference between being right and being right on record. He checked my ID, checked the deed. Let's go up, he said. We drove the convoy, his cruiser first. My truck behind, up the 1.7 miles of bare hardwoods, over the creek bridge, up the switchbacks. My house appeared through the trees at the final curve just like it always did. Except the driveway lights still glowed and the silver Subaru still sat there like it belonged. We walked to the front door together. Deputy Souls knocked. There was a pause about 8 seconds. Not the pause of I was in the shower. The pause of I'm calculating. Then the door opened, and there she was, Connie Marsh. Mid-50s. Trim. Composed. The kind of woman who looks like she's never raised her voice in her life because she's never needed to. People usually comply before she gets to that part. She looked at the deputy, then at me. A tiny shift flickered behind her eyes, recalibration. Like she'd been running a script and suddenly someone changed the scene. Ms. Marsh, I said because I recognized her. I'd seen her at the fence line before. She wasn't a stranger. She was my neighbor, standing inside my home. Her voice stayed calm, almost administrative. Mr. Ashworth, I want to explain the situation. Deputy Souls stepped slightly forward, taking control without making a show of it. Ma'am, do you own this property? The property has been vacant. Do you own this property? She blinked just once. No, but the community has an interest in... Ma'am, step outside. Now. What happened next was one of the strangest porch conversations I've ever witnessed. And I've watched people explain fraud to judges like it was a misunderstanding about punctuation. Connie delivered her position with rehearsed calm. The property had been vacant, unmonitored, at risk. Vacant mountain homes attract vandalism, wildlife liability. As HOA president, she had a duty to ensure community safety. She had secured and maintained the property until my January return. Deputy Souls asked the questions that matter. When did you enter? First week of November. How did you enter? Pause. The door was unlocked. I knew it was false. Dale locks everything, yet I said nothing. That's a detail for lawyers and reports, not porch arguments. And the locks, the deputy asked, gesturing at the hardware. These aren't original. I changed them for security, she said, like she was explaining a sensible home improvement. You changed the locks on a house you don't own, the deputy said, each word slower, more deliberate. Her composure didn't break, but it strained. Stress fractures in the calm. Deputy Souls turned to me. Mr. Ashworth, can we walk through the residence? That's why I'm here, I said. And that walkthrough, God walking through your own home behind a deputy phone camera in your hand, feels like touring a crime scene where the victim is your sense of safety. Entry hall, her coat rack, her lamp, her little table with a dish holding keys and loose change like she'd been dropping her pockets there for weeks. Living room, her sofa shoved where mine used to be. My furniture pushed against a wall like it was the guest in its own house. Throw blankets, her coffee table, her fireplace. A cord of my firewood stacked neatly, ash in the grate, still faintly warm. She'd been enjoying my home like it was a rental with a better view. Master bedroom, her bed, her dresser, personal items on the nightstand. My bed and the dresser my ex-wife and I bought for this house moved into the guest room, shoved together like they were luggage. Kitchen, her cookware mixed with mine, her food in my refrigerator, a coffee maker that wasn't mine sitting on my counter like it had always belonged. Then I found the original locks. In my kitchen trash can, 4 deadbolt cylinders, cleanly removed, professional locksmith work. Not a break-in, not desperation. Planning. And outside, 4 security cameras mounted into my timber frame with long hardware screws. Her cameras, recording my property. When I checked my internet account on my phone still billing to me, I found the service address had been transferred into her name at my address. And in the mudroom, 17 delivery boxes stacked like a neat little monument, all addressed to Connie Marsh at my home. By the time I finished, I'd taken 89 photos. Room by room, detail by detail. The same way I used to build evidence packages when people thought they'd get away with crimes because they wore suits and smiled in meetings. Back on the porch, Deputy Souls exhaled slowly. Mr. Ashworth, I'm going to be honest. This is unusual. I'm going to need to file a detailed report and get my sergeant involved. What I can do right now is require her to vacate. That's what I want, I said. Right now. The rest can follow. He told Connie she had 2 hours to collect personal belongings under supervision. And here's the thing about people like Connie. She didn't start packing. She argued. 40 minutes of arguing. The property was at risk without her. The owner was never here. The community had a legitimate safety interest. She'd invested effort. Removing her would leave the home vulnerable again. The deputy listened with professional patience at first. Then his answers shortened. Then he stopped responding and just watched her like a man counting down a fuse. At minute 41, he said flat as a steel door, "Ma'am, you need to start moving your belongings to your vehicle right now, or I'm going to change the nature of this interaction." That did it. She started loading what would fit: bedding, personal items, some kitchen stuff, the coffee maker, throw blankets. The big furniture stayed because it wasn't going into a Subaru. Deputy Souls made it clear she's leaving tonight. The rest will be handled legally. And before she left, he made her remove her cameras. One by one, she carried them down from my walls and loaded them into her car. The screw holes stayed behind little puncture wounds in the wood of a home that had never asked for this. At 6:43 p.m., her taillights disappeared down Ridge Run Lane around the first curve, and then she was gone. I stood on my porch for a minute, breathing cold mountain air that didn't feel peaceful anymore, just empty. That night, I changed every lock. Front rear mudroom, door bar, new camera system, mine wired to my accounts, my storage. When you've had your home violated like that, you don't sleep because you're tired. You sleep because the adrenaline finally runs out. I called James at 9 p.m. and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "The internet transfer matters. She used your address to obtain services. That's fraud, Victor, not just trespass." "And the locksmith," I said. "Those cylinders weren't forced. Someone removed them cleanly." "I want to know who she hired," he replied, "and why." Then Dale's story clicked into place, the call from a maintenance company confirming vacancy. Somebody asked the right question at the right time, and Dale, overwhelmed by his father's hospital stay, gave them the answer Connie needed. I sat in my living room looking at the furniture out of place. The room still carrying the wrongness of someone else's life sitting on top of mine like a cheap rug. And I realized something that should have been obvious but isn't, because we want to believe the world is mostly reasonable. People don't always steal because they're desperate. Sometimes they steal because they're certain. Certain they're the exception. Certain their intentions are for the greater good. Certain their title, HOA, President, Board Chair, Community Leader, makes them a little more allowed than everyone else. That kind of certainty is more dangerous than anger, because anger burns out. Certainty builds plans. On Monday, James called with the first real twist, the piece that turned this from crazy neighbors squatting into something much uglier. Start with the contractor, he said. Blue Ridge Summit's HOA uses a local maintenance contractor, Ridgeline Property Services. My jaw tightened. Okay. On October 28th, James continued, Connie called the owner directly. Not through a board vote, not through a documented authorization. She instructed him to secure your property as a community safety measure. I stared at my kitchen wall like it might explain human nature, and he did it, James said. He hired a locksmith, Mountain Lock and Key. October 31st, non-destructive entry. Invoice went to Ridgeline. Ridgeline bundled it into the HOA's maintenance invoice. So the HOA paid to break into my house, I said slow. James's voice went colder. Connie wrote a one-page document on HOA letterhead, titled it Emergency Property Security Authorization, cited a provision from their CC&R's Article 9, Section 4. And that provision applies only to member properties inside their development, James said. Your property isn't in the HOA. The document has no legal basis. Ooh, a beat. She fabricated authority, he said, or willfully misapplied it. Either way, she used a fake justification to open your door. That was the moment my confusion turned into something sharper, because now it wasn't just trespass. It was premeditation with a paper trail. And then James hit me with the second twist, the unexpected ally. 2 board members resigned back in November, he said, Frank Doss and Linda Park. Why? They saw the locksmith charge on the HOA financial summary, James said. Frank didn't recognize the line item. He called the contractor. Contractor explained Connie's authorization. Linda, the attorney, read the CC&Rs and told Connie outright she had no authority and that what she'd authorized constituted breaking and entering. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. So someone tried to stop her. Yes, James said. They resigned because they didn't want the liability. And, Victor, they kept everything. Minutes, emails, notes. I sat back. Because here's the part most people don't understand in court. The truth doesn't win because it's true. It wins because you can prove it. And apparently Connie had been sloppy enough to talk. Frank's notes. Linda's records board meeting minutes from 2023 where Connie called my property. The jewel of the ridge said it was wasted. And then this is the line that sealed her fate. Said one way or another, that property should be part of this community story. 14 months before she moved in. 14 months of watching, circling, building a narrative, waiting for Dale to get distracted. Waiting for me to be gone long enough to claim abandonment with a straight face. James built the criminal referral like a freight train deed, tax payments timeline, locksmith invoice, the fake authorization, internet transfer package logs, HOA records showing thousands spent to maintain my home under HOA accounts structured under the spending threshold. Connie could approve a loan. And when the grand jury indicted her, the case didn't feel like neighbor drama anymore. It felt like what it always was, a person in a little pocket of power who decided laws were optional if she said the word community enough times. The trial happened in Boone. I sat in the gallery, James beside me. Connie sat there with that same administrative calm, like she was waiting for someone to recognize she was important. The DA introduced 3 documents right out of the gate. My property tax receipt dated November 11th. The recorded deed. The property management agreement on file. Then Dale testified, soft-spoken guilt hanging on him like wet wool, telling the jury the property was seasonal, not abandoned, and he never authorized Connie to enter. And then the DA brought out the board minutes and Frank's handwritten notes. That one sentence got read aloud in open court. One way or another, the jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. I've watched verdicts delivered for crimes involving millions, corruption, wire fraud, things that take years to build. This one felt smaller in scale and heavier in the chest because it was my bed moved into a guest room, my locks in a trash can, my house turned into someone else's weekend fantasy. At sentencing, the judge looked at Connie for a long time. Ms. Marsh, she said, you are an intelligent woman. You said out loud you intended to have this property one way or another. And then you spent months waiting for a window to take it. You fabricated a document. You directed a contractor to open a door you had no right to open. You changed the locks and lived there for weeks. Then the judge said the words Connie never thought she'd hear from someone in authority. This was not a mistake. It was a plan. suspended sentence, probation, a 5-figure fine. And then the civil side hit like a second hammer: damages for occupancy repairs, account restoration, and punitive damages tied to premeditation. Liens. Settlements. HOA governance reforms forced by their insurance carrier. The association paid a chunk through liability coverage, and Connie personally ended up with a judgment that followed her home like a shadow. The kind of number you don't shake off. The kind that sits there quietly every time you look at your front door and remember you're not the main character in other people's stories. Early June, I drove back up to the house. Ridge Run Lane in summer looks innocent. Hardwoods leafed out creek running higher light, broken into green pieces through the canopy. Same curves, same road, same final left bend where the house appears. I parked and sat for a moment before getting out. New deadbolts. My cameras. The timber repaired where her screws bit into the frame. Chimney inspected. House whole again. Dale arrived 20 minutes later, walked up onto the porch, and we stood looking out at the ridge line, blue layers fading into the distance like the world exhaling. He said quietly, "Victor, that morning before you called the sheriff, what made you block the road?" I looked down Ridge Run as it disappeared into trees, one road in, one road out. 25 years, I said. You learn when someone's about to run. And here's the lesson I didn't expect to learn this late in life, because I thought I already knew people. I thought I'd seen every flavor of entitlement that exists. Power doesn't always look like a badge or a gun or a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like letterhead. Sometimes it looks like a neighborhood newsletter and a woman who says community values while she's walking into your house with a locksmith. And the scary part isn't that people like that exist. The scary part is how many folks around them shrug until the bill comes due. Because it's easier to believe the rules still matter than to admit someone's testing whether they do. But karma, real karma, doesn't usually arrive as lightning. It arrives as paperwork. It arrives as minutes from a meeting someone forgot would become evidence. It arrives as a lien attached to the very house that was supposed to be her little kingdom. So yeah, when people ask me if I feel bad that Connie's life got turned upside down, I tell them the truth. I didn't turn her life upside down. She did. I just made sure the road out was blocked until the law caught up. Now, I'll leave you with the question that still makes people argue when I tell this story, because there's always that one person who thinks they're being reasonable. If someone genuinely believes they're protecting the community, where's the line? At what point does good intention stop being a defense and start being a costume for theft? And if you were in my boots standing at your own front door key, not turning someone else's coats hanging in your entryway, what would you have done? Would you have waited calmly for law enforcement? Or would you have made sure they couldn't leave first? Drop your take in the comments, right or wrong, justice or overkill. And if you've ever had a neighbor in HOA or anyone with a little bit of power try to treat your home like it was theirs, tell that story too.